So, a number of you missed the last Sundays. Tim was here, and he gave us a really wonderful Dharma talk. We all enjoyed it, yeah. We got a really good dose of Zen Buddhism, right? So we're sitting here, everyone's used to victory, right? So so he hit this thing and just knocked the hell out of that bull, right? Hit it 3 times. I thought some of you probably woke up perhaps the first time in your life. Well, maybe me too. And at the end, we all sat here for 45 minutes, in our typical fashion. And again, he just hit the hell out of that thing. So it's very Zen. And he had this big stick, and he slammed on the stage a couple times. And then we had that very interesting interchange with the monastic who came up and had a little interchange with him. So some of you all know that I love Zen Buddhism. I love it, and so I was very familiar with what he was saying, and I enjoyed it very much. And I thought maybe today I would give you all a little context, not that it's necessary. You remember he was talking about the wood and the relative, and then the absolute, right? That it's solid, but then it isn't solid. So and he mentioned the Diamond Sutra a number of times, and the Diamond Sutra is maybe one of the most important sutras in Mahayana Buddhism, but in Zen. And I remember, I'll tell you this story in a minute. I don't think that my mind is going to be very linear, unfortunately. So I don't know if I'll get to that or not. But I'll tell you why I first read the Diamond Sutra in a minute. But when I did, it just was made no sense to me whatsoever. It was just kind of ridiculous. I mean, it is a kind of ridiculous in certain ways. I'll explain that. And then, there's one of the things that just turned me off completely the first time I read it. This is supposedly the Buddha saying, and why is the promise limited to Mahayana disciples? That's a kind of a suspicion. The Mahayana came after the Buddha, right? So here's the Buddha saying, why is this limited to Mahayana disciples? It is because the Hinayana, which is the oldest form, disciples have not yet been able to free themselves from such arbitrary conceptions of phenomena. So right off the bat, it's putting down one branch of actually what's now called Theravada Buddhism. So the truth is, this wasn't written by the Buddha, and it was written maybe 600-700 years after the historical Buddha, and but that doesn't take away from the fact that it's really a great sutra. It's really quite wonderful, which I will try to make some sense of. I was listening to watching the basketball game this morning, and they had a commercial for Audi cars on, and it said Audi, they advertise themselves as truth in engineering. Isn't that good? Truth in engineering. So it was like truth in engineering. So I was thinking about that, and so it reminded me that years ago I had this kind of, I used to say in Dharma talks, a little Byrdism. I've completely forgotten it. So I saw that, and it was truth is a fragile presence in the midst of paradox. Ooh. It's pretty good, isn't it? I made that up. Truth is a fragile presence in the midst of paradox. So a lot of what this is about, and certainly Zen is about paradox. It's really about paradox. And it may not be too much of a hyperbole to say that without paradox there is no truth. I don't know that maybe there's too much hyperbole in that, but I don't think there is. So the other thing is, I was listening to. I have no idea where this is going. I was listening to a lot of people talking about the Supreme Court decision saying that the people in Michigan have a right to vote to end affirmative action. And so just listening to the people, they were both sides were just brilliant. Said, no, this is not true, and yes, this is true, and no, this is not true, and yes, it's true. And I thought, where's the paradox in that? Truth is either this or that, right? It's either this side or that side. There's no holding of the tension of opposites, is what Jung called it. The tension of opposites, that both sides are true. And I think it's probably safe to say that we're children of the Greeks, who did not have much, the Greek or the Western idea of logic is that you have to resolve paradox with synthesis. But the Eastern and in Buddhism, it's not that you have to resolve paradoxes, that you have to hold it. You have to bear the discomfort of it. You have to bear being uncomfortable with the idea that the liberals are right and so are the conservatives. Oh my God, that couldn't possibly be true, right? It's not right. It's impossible. It's either this side is right or that side is right. So what you're presented with, really particularly in the Zen Buddhism, is a whole style was formed. A language was created actually in China, in Chan Buddhism, where they learned to speak almost in a way that maintains paradox. And nowadays we read it, it's just almost impossible to understand even the meaning of it. And I will read something over and over and over, and then all of a sudden I'll say, oh, yeah. There was a teacher, a famous teacher, and his student, a king was coming to have an audience with him, and so the teacher's attendant came in and said, "Oh, teacher, the king is here to have an interview with you." And the teacher said, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you." And then the student said, No, I didn't know. I said, the king is here to interview. And then the teacher said, "Oh," as if he didn't understand. I had to read that 2 or 3 times to understand, really. He was saying the king in the Buddha in each of us is always here. And the student never got it, apparently. But, they write that way. This is the way they write, and it's quite brilliant and wonderful. So I got 2 emails, and he's not here, so I won't repeat the email that he sent because he's not here, which is a lie, of course. That would be Raoul. So I got 2 emails. One email said, they said, "I can't remember what you said about that. What was that Krishnamurti thing? I can't remember it. That thing about thought ending." And he said, "How did you say that?" So I love it when people send me emails saying they can't really remember a sentence, because it's always a good sentence. It's always a great sentence. And it's always, there's paradox in it. Or there's always, and the other one was from somebody who was here who said, "What was that? I can't remember that thing you said about trust in things, and what was that?" So I loved getting those emails, because I thought, I love knowing that people are grappling with it. So what does that mean? So the thing about the Krishnamurti statement is that thought has to see itself before it can end. It's not easy to understand, kids. Did you just get that right off the bat? Hey, yeah, right, that's it. Thought has to see itself before it can end. I mean, what are you? Are you something other than thought? So the idea is that, I mean, it's almost difficult, it's like to say, well, no, if I see thought, then thought will end, right? But, there's me inside, right? But the idea that thought only ends when it sees itself, it's just beautiful. And it's very paradoxical. And then the other one was, of course, that the statement of Bodhidharma, trust in self. Trust in things, not in self, which is a bit of the same thing. Not trusting in self would be trusting in this solidified me that wants life to be the way, I want everything to turn out well. You remember I was at a picnic? Remember I told you all that I got upset with the wind? It's true. I was sitting there trying to eat my food, and the wind kept blowing my stuff and down, and I really got extremely upset. I was very angry with the wind, and I thought, trust in things, not in self. Now, what does that mean? So, but that's. I do think that for us to acknowledge that we have an issue with paradox. We don't like. We need to resolve it. We need to make some sort of little neat package out of it, as opposed to bearing that the tension of opposites. That this is true, and that is true. So that's what Tim was saying last Sunday. That the paradox of that it's empty, and yet it's full. And that's very Mahayana. That the mind is empty of self, and yet self rises. There is a self that it's like when you sit and you see when you see in silence, there is no one seeing. And then, of course, you come out of it, and then you say, "I saw." Then the self arises, and there's just interplay, constant interplays between this arising me and this that it comes out of emptiness, out of silence. So, so I wanted to share with you all about the. This is one of my favorite stories, and I'm ready to quit talking. Some of you have heard this story 2 or 3 times. It's a wonderful story. How many people saw Good Will Hunting, that movie? I love that movie. And I'm convinced that Matt Damon read this. It's kind of a common story. But maybe he didn't. But you remember I won't tell you that. I'll just tell you the story of Wei Nong. So Wei Nong is like about 600 A.D. and he sold firewood near Canton, China. Poor, very poor, and illiterate. Never went to school. His father was kind of fired from a job, and so and died when Wei Nong was very young. So he had to take care of his mom, and he sold firewood. And so one day, he's in the village, and he goes into a shop and selling his wood. Do y'all remember this story? So he goes into the shop and he's selling his wood, and he hears this person walking out of the shop who's quoting a sutra from a paragraph from the Diamond. No, not a stanza from the Diamond Sutra. Now, this little guy is, he's young, Wei Nong, and he's illiterate. And so he hears these 4 lines, and he is enlightened. So when I first read that, I thought, hey, I've got to find that sutra. And I did, right? But, wouldn't you? If you read a little illiterate guy hears 4 lines, and he becomes enlightened, right? I thought, well, hell, I'm going to find that out, too. So I got it. And it made no sense to me whatsoever. whatsoever. And by the way, on my refrigerator, someone gave me this. Let's just see if I have it. I think. Oh, I'm not going to find it. It's so beautiful. There's a passage. There are 4 lines from the Diamond Sutra that are so they're very famous and quite beautiful. And if I had my glasses on, doesn't matter. It's on my refrigerator. So anyway, so the story continues. I'll just continue with the story a little bit, and then I'll come back. But so he goes to he becomes enlightened. So someone gives him enough money to take care of his mom. Thank goodness, right? We don't want him to just go off and leave his poor mom without any help. So the story is that someone gave him money, and so he to take care of his mother. And he goes north. He travels north for 30 days, and he comes to the monastery of the 5th patriarch. And the 5th patriarch, there are 6 patriarchs. The first one being Bodhidharma. So this was the 5th patriarch, and so he goes there and he walks in and he kind of like just says to the patriarch, looks at him. He's like this little southerner, short and kind of dark skinned, and they look down. They called him aborigines. The northerners did. Why is it that northerners always look down on southerners? I have never understood that, and I have always resented it. But so the patriarch sort of like looked down on him, and he says, so what do you think? You think you're coming here like to be enlightened? And so the story is Wei Nong said, well, I don't think that is enlightenment limited to tall people from the north. And so the patriarch really liked that a lot. So, and he also had this feeling that a lot of people were going to be very jealous, and maybe back in those times, when you were jealous of someone, you sometimes poisoned them. So he told him it's true. The story is that the Bodhidharma was poisoned. So anyway, he told him, he said, really, I think you just need to go and hull rice for a while. So go back, into the kitchen, and so which he did for a long time. So for I think 8 months. At some point, this is like maybe 3 years before the 5th patriarch died, and so he made an announcement that he said it's time, for the person who is really most enlightened to manifest and to come forth. So he says, I want you to write a stanza on the wall that shows shows that you truly understand the truth of emptiness of the Dharma. So everybody sort of looked around and said, well, really the head guy, I think his name is Shin Shao, they said, he's going to get it. He's going to win because he's the smartest, right? And he's next to the patriarch, and he's brilliant. And so they said, we'll just not worry about it. We'll let him do it. And so he kind of, the guy did stress, and he thought, oh my God. He said, what am I, this is it. What am I going to write? And he said, do I know really what to say? And so he finally said, well, to himself, if I am truly enlightened, if I really do know the truth of the Dharma, the patriarch will recognize it. And if not, I've been wasting my time anyway. So he went and he wrote on the wall, our body may be compared to the Bodhi tree. Our mind is a mirror bright. Carefully we cleanse and watch them hour by hour, and let no dust collect upon them. What do you think? I actually think in some ways that's almost like a perfect mindfulness 24 hours, 24/7, right? That we're mindful moment to moment, and we keep the dust from collecting, right? And if we see the dust, if you have a bad thought, you just kind of observe it, you note it, blah, blah, blah. If you're angry, so it's really, so the patriarch said, this is very good.
Could you read it again?
He said, however, you're not enlightened. But he said, I want you to go back and kind of work on another stanza. But He said, in the meantime, and so he told everybody, he said, leave that on the wall. And he said, no one's going to go wrong practicing this, right? That the body is the same as the Bodhi tree, and the mind is a mirror bride, and keep the dust off of that mirror, and by wiping it clean. So anyway, Wei Nang is in there hauling his rice in the kitchen. He's never been apparently in the meditation hall once. So he's in there hauling his rice, and so he hears someone quote him, and he says, "What is that?" And so they explain to him the story. He says, "Well, would you take me to the wall?" I said, "I want to look at it." And so they do, and he said, "I don't know how to write." But he said, "Could I write something on the wall?" So of course, the monk says, "Are you kidding? You're from the South. You've got a Southern accent, a Tennessee accent. What the hell do you know?" So anyway, he said, "Sure." So he wrote this on the wall. Wei Nang wrote this on the wall. Wei Nang is the guy who read the Diamond Sutra. Remember that, and got enlightened. So he read this, and it said, "By no means is Bodhi a kind of tree." Now you all know Bodhi, the Bodhi tree, but Bodhi means awaken. That's Bodhi, Dharma. Bodhi means awaken. That's what each of us has. Some of you have more than others. I'm just kidding. We all have the same amount. We all have the same amount of Bodhi in the mind. Bodhicitta, you remember the term bodhicitta means the thought of awakening. Okay, so he said, "By no means is Bodhi a kind of tree, nor is the bright, reflecting mind a case of mirrors. Since mind is emptiness, where can dust collect?" Wow. So, the patriarch sort of said, So he got the bowl, and he became the sixth patriarch. And he actually left in the middle of the night, and because the fifth patriarch knew that somebody would poison him, really. And so he actually kind of stayed underneath any notoriety for like 15 or 16 years. So I love that. Yes, and I want to read that again. By no means is Bodhi a kind of tree, nor is the bright, reflecting mind a case of mirrors. Since mind is emptiness, where can dust collect? So where can dust, if your nature is true emptiness, where can dust collect on it, on your true nature? You could really say that Shin Shao's poem was of the relative. That it's not true, right? I mean, the first one, right? Our body may be compared to the Bodhi tree, while our mind is. You could say that's a relative truth. It's true. Just as one side of the other side is true, liberalism or conservatism or liberty, all one side is. So it is a relative truth, but of course, Wei Nang then wrote what you might call an absolute truth, that the absolute truth is emptiness. So the problem is, or the challenge is, to balance both of those realities. The truth of emptiness, the truth that, according to what Wei Nang later said, and he has wonderful, wonderful sutras, by the way. He taught, and he really is, Wei Nang is really the true beginning of Zen. Right? I mean, he's the big guy, the sixth patriarch. That they all basically come from him. Tim comes from him, and all Zen teachers come from ultimately from Wei Nang. So the teaching is that our nature, our true nature, is empty and pure. And when we are in absolute stillness and silence, that's what we experience. That we experience the truth of what we are. And at the same time, The relative truth is, right? I mean, the relative truth is again, living in the world, being in the world. And it's one thing to be sitting in silence and experiencing your true nature. And then Lisa says something that gets on your nerves. What do you do then? So you're right, that's the relative. The relative is then is interaction, is the relationship, the way we are with one another, the way liberals and conservatives relate to one another in this country. I mean, I'm really on that, as you can tell, but it's very disturbing to me, the degree to which we are polarized into I am right and therefore you are wrong and I hate you, which is, it's really rather dreadful, but it's the result of the inability to bear the tension of opposites. It's just that's all that it is. And so when I sit and listen last Sunday to this guy teaching this message, it occurs to me it's extraordinarily important for us to at least entertain the notion, right? At least entertain the notion that paradox is where truth is. Not the certainty that you are right or I am right. It's never there. Truth is never there. It can only be in the tension of where the opposite is present, the opposite to whatever we are. It's the only shot we have. So in some ways, to me, this is extraordinarily important to our future, our race, our species, really. If we can't really get this, someone reminded me yesterday, I sat with a client, and I've said this to him for 2 years, and he reminded me yesterday. He said that I keep telling him that our only hope is to survive long enough to grow up as a species. I think it's true. It's not clear that we will, is it? It's not clear that we're going to survive long enough before we, to really psychologically, spiritually, whatever you want to grow up. So just a few more things, and then I'm going to. Oh my God, I just get to talking. So there are two things. So the thing about this. The Diamond Sutra that the Diamond Sutra precedes Zen by about 300 years. Okay, so you can really see how Zen comes out of it. What is so astounding about the Diamond Sutra is that whoever wrote it, and we don't know who wrote it. We don't know who wrote any of these Mahayana sutras, basically, that were written in 200 and 300 and 400 years A.D. Right? They're that long after the Buddha's death, but their literature was an attempt, an amazing attempt, at working both sides of the street. Right? They'll say one thing and then they'll turn around and say the other. And so I just wanted to give you all a flavor of it because it's really quite fascinating. So he said, Subhuti, when Subhuti's the Buddha is talking to his disciple Subhuti. So when disciples begin their practice of seeking to attain Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, that means highest perfect wisdom. That's not a bad thing to go after, is it? How about let's go after Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, highest perfect wisdom. Beverly, what do you think? I'm for it. Okay, so he says when you're going after that thing, he says you should perceive and understand and realize that all things and all dharmas are no things. All things are no things, and therefore one ought not to conceive within their minds any arbitrary conception whatsoever. Has anybody got any conceptions that you're holding on to? I've got a few. Do you have any, Kathy? No, Kathy has none. So he, think about that. That we should not hold on to any arbitrary conception whatsoever. And that that all things are no things. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense, right? So then he says, because he says, by the way, let me just put my glasses on. This is just ridiculous. This is right. By the way, this would be worth our having a little course on. By the way, the Diamond Sutra. If any disciple were to say that the Tathagata, do you know what the Tathagata is? The Tathagata is, he referred to himself as the Tathagata, which I think is pretty funny since he didn't write this in the first place, right? Did that make sense, what I just said? Whoever wrote this is acting like he's the Buddha. Well, never mind. So the Tathagata is a word for, it actually maybe literally means thus come or thus gone. It basically means, that you ain't here. But it's another word for Buddha, enlightened one. And he says, if any of you all were to say, I should say, or me, if we were to say that the Buddha is now coming, or now going, or is now sitting up, or is now lying down, he would not have understood the principle of what I am teaching. So rather, if you saw the Buddha and you said, oh, he's sitting there, he would say, no, there's a body sitting there, but the Buddha is not sitting there. The Buddha is nowhere. If the Buddha is emptiness, how could you say empty is sitting? Or lying down, or standing, or coming, or going? Where is emptiness? So in some ways, if you even said of a Buddha, the word he, that would be wrong. That would be a concept. The closest you could come is to call it an it, I suppose. Emptiness could be it, I suppose, but you sure can we refer to emptiness as he or she? Hello, Miss Emptiness, right? So again, though, that's just the flavor of the language. He says, and then the very famous one. This is one you have all heard, and Tim referred to this again. He actually made allusions to the Diamond Sutra all the way through his time. This is a very famous one. Subhuti, Jane, Subhuti, do not think that the Tathagata, he refers to himself as the Tathagata. I love that because you remember Krishnamurti always referred to himself as the speaker, right? It's the same thing, right? He's being totally impersonal. He said the Tathagata. I'm going to do that by myself now. I'm going to say the Southerner. Right? That would be pretty good, right? The Southerner. Okay, the Tathagata, do not think that the Tathagata ever considers within his own mind, I ought to enunciate a system of teaching for the elucidation of the Dharma. You should never cherish such an unworthy thought. And why? So here's the very famous reference. Because if any disciple should or harbor such a thought, he would not only be misunderstanding the teaching, he would be slandering the teaching as well. What has just been referred to as a system has no meaning as truth, cannot be cut up into pieces and arranged into a system. The words can only be used as a figure of speech. Okay, and that's the wrong one. Yeah, here it is. But I underline that one too, because again, in other words, he's saying the words. It's the famous Mahayana metaphor. The words are fingers pointing towards the moon. And if you look at the finger, right, and don't look at the moon, you've lost it. The words are just a finger. They're just a pointer. The moon is silence. Could you see it? You can only see it. So here's the metaphor. It was the wrong page. In using words and ideas, he says, the Buddha says, we should recall that in making them and explaining the Dharma, they're only being used as a raft that is used to cross a river. That's the famous metaphor. I mean, you hear it over. And by the way, that actually appears in the early Nikaya, in the Pali scriptures. As the raft is of no further use after the river is crossed, it should be discarded. So all of these arbitrary conceptions of things, about things, should be wholly given up as one attains enlightenment. How much more so should be given up the conception of existence or non-existence. It is or it is not. And this is a constant teaching, that we have to give up not only that it is, but we have to also give up that it is not. Neither of them. They're just, again, both sides of that equation, right? So the truth is it is and it is not. And so the Diamond Sutra, in the Diamond Sutra, whoever the writer constantly says one thing and then he says, but it isn't this. He says, it's this, and then he turns right around and he says, but it really isn't this. But it is this. And then he says, and it's that, but it really isn't that. But it is that. So again, it's this is the early way that they tried to talk about paradox. Eventually, it goes to koans, right? I mean, these illogical statements. They're no longer, right? I mean, this is, Zen comes out of this, because then they developed a language that no longer says it is, it just presents almost illogical statements that you have to come to through intuition. So that's the best I could do. I can't do any better than that. The Diamond Sutra is you need to read it. It's very short. I think it's 300 lines, and you need to read it about 10 times. I'm not exaggerating. The more you read it, and the more you read it, because at first it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but eventually it makes a great deal of sense. It's, I mean, you begin to see that really the person is struggling really, really heroically to show that truth cannot be put into words. So then, and that's just the way. And it's as you read it, you just see that over and over and over, and it begins to sort of sink in. On the other hand, I didn't have that experience of enlightenment that Wei Ning did. So remember that there's a phrase. It's that life is as fleeting as a dewdrop, as a summer storm. That's the famous 4 lines from that you read all over the place. They're always on little things that tack on your refrigerator. Some people say that that's what was the 4 lines that Wei Ning heard. It was that famous